Buenos dias. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeronimo Rodriguez, and I serve as Chief Advocacy Officer for Ascension, Texas. It's wonderful to be back with you and see familiar faces. I'm honored to welcome you today to what I know will be an informative discussion about COVID-19 and its impact on the education system. We know COVID-19 has impacted every organization and every individual in Central Texas and beyond. And in some way, many of the impacts have not yet been fully realized. We must continue to talk about the challenges we have faced as we plan ahead for the days and months to come. And as a healthcare system, we continue to plan around the clock to help keep our community safe from the virus. And most recently, our staff have spent and continue to spend countless hours preparing for vaccine distribution. I'm especially proud to be representing Ascension, Texas, and more than 12,000 associates, many of whom have been on the front lines of the global pandemic for the past 10 months. Each and every day, our staff has demonstrated incredible courage and fortitude and remained committed to caring for individuals who need it most, including thousands of people in Central Texas. I appreciate and am grateful for their service. We know that we will not likely be COVID-free for months to come, but we must all continue to do our part to ensure our local communities are COVID safe by wearing a mask, social distancing, and washing our hands frequently. I know our healthcare system is not alone in this focus, and that our schools and educational institutions have also been focused on keeping individuals safe, from grade school to collegiate level schools like our partner Dell Medical School. All are doing their part to educate and protect students, staff, and the broader community. Ascension, Texas has served this community for more than 118 years. And we are especially proud to have done it alongside some incredible, Ascension, Texas has served our community for more than 118 years, and we're especially proud to have done it alongside some incredible educational institutions and community leaders who are doing what's best for Central Texas. Throughout the pandemic, I have been particularly inspired by the collaborative efforts between our local healthcare systems, schools, community leaders, and local health authorities who have all come together with a united goal of keeping our communities, our neighbors, our friends, and our families healthy and safe. And as we talk today about the challenges faced and impacts of the pandemic, let's also take a moment to reflect on how far we've come over the last 10 months and how we have supported one another, recognizing the social, emotional needs in each other. While I hope there will soon be an end in sight for this global pandemic, I'm even more hopeful that the lessons we've learned and the kindness and collaborative spirit we've extended to one another will carry far past the end of the pandemic. Thank you all. And Judy.
Thank you so much, Geronimo. And you're wearing two hats today as the Chief Advocacy Officer for Ascension Seton and the President of the Austin School Board. So you have seen firsthand the impact of this pandemic, and we so appreciate your thoughtful words. And we also are very grateful for our engaged presenting sponsor, Dell Children's. Good morning, everyone. I'm Judy Maggio with Austin PBS. We appreciate everyone tuning in on Facebook today to talk about a very timely topic. Our issue today is lessons from COVID-19 in our education system. I have the honor of co-hosting these wonderful discussions with Courtney Bailey. She is the program director of the Engage series. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you, Judy. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I would like to remind those who are watching via Facebook Live that you can join the conversation by typing in your comments and questions in the comment section of this video. It's better to get those questions in sooner than later, and we would love to hear from you. Thank you, and let's get started.
Don't forget, this is called Engage Breakfast, Engage series. So we want you all to engage and ask some of the questions that are on your mind this morning. Thank you, Courtney. We'll see you in just a minute. We first want to introduce our panel. We have four diverse leaders from the world of education. First, Riza Cooper. She's the principal at Elgin Middle School. Stephanie Elizalde, the superintendent of the Austin Independent School District, Wayne Knox, the chief operating officer of Houston Tillotson University, and Vanessa Santamaria Dainton, the former vice president for the Austin Council of PTAs. We appreciate your time and expertise this morning to all of our panelists. Our first question, and if you could keep this brief because we have a lot of ground to cover, tell us about your role in the community and the biggest lesson that you've learned personally as a leader in our local education system. And Wayne, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Judy. Good morning, all. I'm Wayne Knox. I have the privilege to serve Houston Tillotson as Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. In that capacity, I'm responsible for ensuring that the ecosystem for our student learning is supported and also developmental for our students and all of our staff members here. The biggest lesson learned in this experience thus far is the idea of grace and innovation. Grace in terms of meeting our students where they are, our staff members, our faculty members to ensure they have what they need to be successful. And then innovation in the sense that we have to take our learning from a brick and mortar institution to an online institution. So that's been very interesting for us to learn how to do this with a lot of grace, but at the same time, a lot of innovation and creativity in our approach.
Risa?
I am the principal of Elgin Middle School, which I've been for 11 years. And the biggest thing that I've learned is that trust and strong relationships with all of our stakeholders is a must. So it's not only with our staff, our students, our parents, but our community, like relationships is huge at this time. Thank you.
Indeed, relationships are key. Vanessa?
Thank you. I'm humbled to be here. So first off, I'm first generation child of immigrants and a graduate of Austin ISD. And for the past 20 plus years, I've had different roles in public education, from being a former bilingual elementary teacher to now really the last 6 years being part of the Austin Council of PTAs, which is really to make every child's potential a reality and to support parent leaders' voices. And specifically, my focus was to focus on diversity and inclusion and bringing in parents kind of new also to the American school system. So biggest lesson I've learned, I learned a lot of lessons in the past 20 years, but the biggest is the value of authentic connection. So between families, parents, teachers, staff, and administration, but specifically with our children. In an inherently based, biased education system, it's really important to connect, to build empathy, compassion, respect, and trust.
And finally, Stephanie, the biggest lesson you've learned.
Well, first, I am humbled to be the proud superintendent in Austin ISD, and certainly I could have selected a better time to have joined the team, but nonetheless, the opportunities or obstacles present themselves when they do. And I think the biggest lesson, there are two lessons that although we're supposed to say one, two really big lessons. One, it's not what happens to us, it's how we respond to what happens to us. But the word us in that revelation for me carries so much more meaning today than it did prior to this pandemic. And I think my role is to continue to build a bridge, really to speaking to what the three previous responses I've heard from this esteemed group of colleagues that are here with me. And that bridge can never be too wide and it can never be too long. We always need to extend and understand rather than judge individual beliefs or positions, because in the end, we can never do enough when we're talking about the lives that are at stake. And I consider this an extremely challenging time that I know we do far better when we work together than when we work individually.
Thank you for that. So this next question is for Vanessa. It's two parts. So the first part, as a parent, what are some of the challenges that you face when advocating and trying to support the needs of your child in the school system? And what would you say to the school systems that they could do to better support parents and guardians, making sure that their voices are a part of the conversation?
Good question. So yeah, as a parent, of course, I'm going to speak to my own experience, but also through my role on ACPTA, or the Austin Council of PTAs, I was honored to work with Lynn Boswell and Lori Solis for continuing that work. But last year, with the support of the Parent Engagement Support Office, Parent Support Specialist, et cetera, we did do a focus, some listening sessions with the community, with our parent community. And we got insight into some of the challenges that dozens of parents shared with us through these sessions back in August of 2019. And so my comments are going to reflect a little bit of those because they're still relevant right now. So as I mentioned before, pre-COVID, it's clear, that the education system is not neutral and that the inequities have only been exacerbated. And so we continue to try to change our kids and students to fit into a system instead of really changing the system to meet the needs of our children. But there are three areas that I think, and I'll kind of intersperse my personal experience as a parent, as I see as the biggest challenges and potential opportunities. So there's three. There's communicating, there's connecting, and then there's also disconnecting. And so first with communicating, of course, between district and parents, administrators and teachers and students and families. So it's just critically important to be very clear, consistent, and culturally responsive in the communication. So consistency is something that schools and districts can control, and clarity is a challenge, especially as the audience grows and becomes diverse. But with consistency with that, things can be, difficult topics can be addressed and readdressed, and there's just a steady rhythm that needs to happen. And we need to name things that we don't know or that we're working on instead of not hearing anything at all. So a constant, steady rhythm of communication and culturally responsive, right? Communicating in multiple languages, embracing cultural differences, it makes it more challenging, and it takes more time and it takes more investment. But it's really the only way to ensure that all of our families have access to the same information and the same opportunities. And then with that intentionally and thoughtfully invests in fostering two-way communication, because you're building relationships that way, which brings me to the second thing, which is connecting. There are so many interpersonal connections in our district, like I mentioned, between all the different people playing, all the players. But I think because we're continually trying to stretch our education dollars, the student and teacher ratios keep going up. It's nearly impossible to maintain strong personal connections. And I really want to emphasize, especially between teacher and student, and how student kind of blends into family as well. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, it was a mad rush for schools to just connect with kids and families. And we saw some families and students just kind of drop off the radar for various reasons. But what it really comes down to is that it went to show that there wasn't really that personal connection happening, right? So we have a lot of connecting problems before COVID, and now this pandemic has exacerbated everything that already really wasn't working. The racial and socioeconomic inequities, so access and supports, assuming that how that kids can learn remotely, that they have access to hardware and a solid internet connection, connecting with resources with help that helps with food and shelter insecurities, connecting with others to prevent feelings of isolation or questionably safe and stable home environments as well. So the mental health needs and social emotional awareness, was a focus, right? We knew that was always a need, and it's just been exacerbated. But I just want to share that on a positive note. I do want to applaud at the beginning of the pandemic how AISD did an amazing job. Austin ISD did an amazing job on providing schools meals to so many of our families, and working on solutions such as the bus hotspots that they worked with Cap Metro for areas needing connection and internet access. We can still do more, right? And so the Community Resilience Trust was also another one that jumped into action, connecting community and organizational leaders to really solve those real-time world problems that were happening and we were seeing in the community. So communicating, connecting, and then lastly, disconnecting. And I'll make this one brief. So we're seeing, that our children are they're connected to a screen, and although somewhat in interactive ways, but really for longer periods of time now than ever. And so in my personal experience as a parent of a middle and a high schooler, I see them during food breaks, and then they both are on screens all during school hours. And then my high schooler is tasked with more homework after, which and on the weekends. And usually the homework also requires to be on a computer or on a screen. So I guess my concern is just the negative impacts it's having on our social, emotional, physical, and mental health. And we know this. And honestly, I'm sure that the teachers are also experiencing this too. And of course, the greater society, all of us are experiencing a lot of this. So we need to just be very cognizant in how we're guiding our kids more on this. And as a parent, like, I feel like I need to figure out how to fill that gap. So need to acknowledge it, build in time to disconnect. You know, this is part of the asynchronous learning piece, but how can we prioritize reconnecting as a family, as community, reconnecting with boredom, with reading, with physical fitness and play? So that's kind of where I'm seeing it right now, and where I feel like the districts could have a good hand in this.
Vanessa, so many issues at play, and it's interesting to hear a parent's perspective, because I know everybody's juggling so many balls right now, and there are just so many issues at play. And as Superintendent Elizalde said, and I'm going to direct this next question to you, Superintendent, it is such a challenging time to be an educator, to run a school district, to be a teacher, to be a parent. I mean, this is, as we say, unprecedented. And Dr. Elizalde, I know that the decision-making has got to be heartbreaking. You made the tough choice at the beginning of the district school year to wait until September the 8th. And then a week after Thanksgiving, you had all remote learning. And then in the newspaper this morning, in the Statesman, there was an article about some hundreds of teachers and staff being denied requests to work remotely in the spring semester, and they're upset about that. So how do you make these decisions? Because it's hard to make everyone happy, the parents, the students, the teachers, the staff. What goes into that balancing act and making those hard choices as we face this pandemic for another several months throughout that spring semester?
I so greatly appreciate, Judy, that you used the word heartbreaking. You know, when I was a principal, every single day I waited until 6 or 6:30 in the evening to exhale. I feel like there should be a new book or a new movie called Waiting to Exhale. And I say that not in jest at all. As a principal, and I know I see Ms. Risa Cooper, she knows what I'm talking about. During pre-pandemic days, you know, you're waiting to make sure all of the buses got home, that all of your children got home, that no one was lost. That is the daily life of a principal. You wait to exhale. And it has exceedingly become more and more pressured as society has changed. Holding a pep rally in a gymnasium, and you know, you've brought in a wonderful motivational speaker, but you're concerned about what could happen when you bring a large number of students together. That was pre-pandemic. So as a superintendent, I have found myself waiting to exhale. And I have to be honest, I don't think I've exhaled since I took the job August the 12th. It is absolutely an impossible situation to be in, but I chose to the position. So it's not a moment where I can say, gosh, I want everybody to feel bad for how tough the job is. Because that's not the way this works, right? But to make decisions, and we've gotten to the point where we have to continue to expand our perspectives. We have to continue to put ourselves, as the saying goes, this time in so many more shoes. And we have to ask ourselves, really speaking to even something I heard Vanessa talk about with regard to the effect this is having on everyone from a mental, social, emotional standpoint. Sometimes crises bring out the best in people, and sometimes crises bring out some of our worst characteristics. And I also heard Wayne talk about grace. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to recognize, even individuals who are very angry with some of the decisions that I've made. We all know that at the root of anger is really sadness. And so it's not that they're angry with me, it's that they're upset with the entire situation. And it isn't an equal balance. I constantly have to ask the question, and how are our children doing? because that is at the center of the decision-making that we must do. At the same time, how are our team members? Because none of the work we do with children can be done without working through our team members. And I do call them team members because I think it is about a team. The position that I hold is really not the superintendent. It's really the superintendency, because it's a team job. There is absolutely no way that any single person can continue prior to pre-pandemic days, but certainly during that period of time. So the decisions involve a group of people. Ultimately, I'm responsible, and I don't get to only pick the parts of the job that I think are going to be easy. You have to take all of it. And so every time that we make a decision, we gather a team members. I have an executive leadership team. Whenever possible, I meet with groups like ACTPA. We include and encourage other groups to reach out, not always to me, they may be reaching out to other members of our team. We come together, I listen, I learn, and then I have to, at the end of the day, evaluate. How do we help our organization continue to move forward? There is light at the end of the tunnel. We can see it. We have to help everyone see it. But until then, we have to continue to support all of our team members and to continue to support our students. We do need to help our teachers also not have to stay on those screens every single minute of the day. And that's because our teachers are perfectionists and they want to do the very best job that they can with our students. But I also need them to give themselves grace. I need all of our team members, whether they are on the human capital side and they're working on those committees, having to make assessments of which accommodations we can approve and which ones we can't. You know, that group is bearing a huge responsibility as well. And so we continue to get up every day and we continue to look forward. There's a reason why the rear view mirror is smaller than the windshield. We look back, we learn, and then we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Elizalde, for that thoughtful response. So Riza, this question is for you. Without a doubt, COVID-19 has widened the digital divide, making it more difficult for those already underserved students to access resources and technology to be successful in this remote environment. So can you tell us a little bit about the students that you serve and how Elgin ISD is navigating this digital divide to make sure that both the in-person and virtual learning is successful?
So one thing about Elgin ISD, we became a one-to-one for all of our students about 5 years ago. So the transition was not as hard as some districts. And so the only thing that's been a struggle is now that our students are not using their one-to-one devices in the building, several of our students are having some internet issues. And so our district did take out hotspots, but still in some of the locations that our students live in, the hotspots have not worked either. And so we have a really awesome technology team that goes out. And so one thing that we're struggling with is trying to figure out when our hotspots don't work, and then the parents aren't willing to bring them in the building because of COVID, of how we can keep those students engaged and connected and successful. But one thing we try to do is see if those students are willing to come in the building, and it's a 50-50. Some of the parents, you know, when the hotspot doesn't work, they bring them in, but some of them, because of health reasons and COVID, they don't bring them in. So that's just been one of our biggest struggles, but I would say that's only about 5% of our students. One thing that we've also noticed during this time is that our staff are having to do way more home visits because, I mean, you have remote learners. And so it's been a huge transition for our staff. Also with this remote and in-person, like we have several of our teachers that's concerned about the equity because we do have the same learning platform. So even our students that's in the building, their learning platform is the same. They do Google Classroom, they view the lessons that the teachers have created, But the students that's in person, they have the teachers in the building to support them, where our remote learners, they may have a parent, they may have an older sibling, or they may be there by themselves. So it's been a real challenge, even when they have the technology device, because they need that support from the teacher as well to navigate Google Classroom and be successful. And so we still working, and but again, like I said earlier, relationships are everything, and just going above and beyond what teachers have been asked to do in the past. We've really increased home visits to stay connected with our remote students and our parents, so that they feel like they are still part of the EMS family.
Wayne, I want to build on some of the things that Risa said, because there is definitely a digital divide, and I know there have been technology challenges at Houston-Tillis University, in addition to the fact that historically Black universities are systemically underfunded compared to predominantly white institutions. HTU is serving a large number of high-need students, and they need a lot of support services, not only the technology that we've been discussing, but housing and basic needs. So could you describe some of the, well, unique financial and logistical challenges that HTU has been facing during this pandemic?
Thank you, Judy, for the question. I think the key thing for us was having to provide and wanting to provide technology to all of our students to bridge the digital divide. Oftentimes, our students come without a laptop or out a desktop device, and so having to move back to their home, they were also without those devices. So we made a decision to invest dollars into providing Microsoft Surfaces to all of our students to ensure that they had the requisite technology that would get them on tap, if you will, for all of the other online learning that we have at the campus. We, like Elgin, had made some advances early in our planning to ensure that we had a digital platform that made sense for the overarching campus. So Office 365, a new LMS, learning management system, Canvas. We had implemented those things prior to the pandemic, so the transition was fairly smooth from a learning perspective, but we had to ensure that students had the device to be successful. So that was the key thing we had to invest in. Then also we found that our students needed to have hotspots as well, because in their homes, they may not have had broadband internet connectivity. And so we had to provide that device to them as well. Again, something we wanted to do because we recognize that we need to meet the needs of our students. Historically, Black colleges have been the petri dish for innovation since our inception. Most of us are 150 plus years old. So we've been innovating since we've been created, if you will. And so the idea of having to continue to have that grit and resilience and innovation is in our DNA. And so we work to do that here in the pandemic. Our approach is different because we're in a technology supported, if you will, environment. So we had to be a different kind of innovation, but nonetheless meeting the needs. And that's something that's not unique to us. We had to make some very targeted investments to ensure that students have what they need. And then similarly for our faculty and staff members, they also needed technology to be successful, whether it was a device that they needed and or instructional materials, and make sure that their lesson was as rich as it would be in person, which has been challenging, but we made those investments to ensure they had what they needed to be successful. And I think that the last thing I would mention is that, continuing on that earlier point about grace and innovation, we had to ensure that we were very thoughtful about the approach and not necessarily setting students up and or faculty members up for failure in terms of having the same schedule we normally would have. We put more grace into that experience to ensure that students had a way to on-ramp to a fully online education, as well as our faculty and staff members had a way to fully on-ramp to delivering services, whether it be instruction and or support services to students in a way that made sense. And so we're all journeying through this together in terms of providing grace to one another, because we, as mentioned before, we're all experiencing the pandemic in different ways. And so we have to continue to show up with that thought of being graceful to one another, because we recognize this is new for all of us. And as well as in the spirit of innovation, learning how to use the technology to be successful. That's something that's different, but we're working through it with grace and innovation to ensure that we're providing the appropriate support services and the appropriate learning experiences to ensure our students leave this experience well equipped to take on anything. The class of 2020 and class of 2021 will be some of our greatest contributions to the labor force, because they will know how to deal with anything thrown at them that was unexpected. So I'm excited for their future, because they will walk into this with a strong sense of determination and persistence.
I love that, Wayne. Thank you. So I want to follow up. We have an audience question. You all have touched on this, the importance of connectedness. And so Eric Lee has a question. It's geared towards Wayne, but I feel like you all can, everyone else could add to it. What advice would you give for college and undergraduate and graduate students to make the most out of their short time on campus and stay connected to the greater Austin community? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's a tough question. I would continue to lean into the idea of grace and persistence and determination, asking our undergraduates and graduate students to really be persistent and staying connected to the work that they're trying to accomplish, as well as walking into it with a sense of grace and understanding that we're all in this together, working towards getting back to normal or some state of normalcy, and then ensuring that they still find ways to connect in a way that's meaningful to Austin and or to their work. There's ways for us to kind of be out and about in a socially distanced way. I think that's one way to approach it, but also just still picking up the phone. I think using the quote unquote old technology, using the telephone to call somebody to connect and to understand a bit more about how what you're doing or what you need support in will help. I think that's been our saving grace as an institution, is that we pick up the phone and call students now to figure out how can we help you. I mean, there might be some things we email to you, but you're getting so many emails, so many notifications. Let me just call you, let you hear a voice. And I think that's been the way in which you build that connection back, and also that grace and knowing that I'm going an extra step to connect with you to ensure that you have what you need to be successful, and or you can hear from me directly on what it is you have a question about.
We have another audience question, and this one is from Rona. And she wants to know, and Superintendent Elizalde, I'll start with you on this, and if anybody else wants to chime in. It's a money question. You know, the budget cuts, have you had to have them despite the fact that you're needing to, I'm guessing, spend more money to make sure that all the remote learning takes place? So how financially are the school districts handling this, you know, new normal, as we say?
Yes, thank you for our viewer sending that question in. I reported on Monday evening to our Board of Trustees, currently just our COVID related expenditures. And I would say those are the ones that we directly know are because of COVID, because there are additional expenses that are related, but maybe not directly connected. So if a teacher is out, but they're working remotely, so they're still delivering instruction to students, but there's a substitute in order to supervise the students that are physically attending the school, as an example. If we do that for an entire year, that's over $22,000 for each and every teacher that we would do that. So of course, if we had the financial means of doing that and we would be able to do that across the district, well, why wouldn't we want to do that? We would want to do that, but that's just one little sliver. Currently to date, we have spent, usually when I talk about education, I say we have invested. Today, I'm specifically using the word spent because these are all things that have occurred as a result of the pandemic. $51.2 million of our budget has been spent on software, hardware, whether it's Chromebooks, iPads, hotspots, the deep cleaning that takes place at our campuses each and every day, each and after every class period in some instances, the personal protective equipment, whether we're talking masks, shields, N95s, for our teachers who are working with our most vulnerable students where the teacher cannot maintain 3 to 6 feet distance, the gloves, the apron, all of that, which is daily use, multiple daily uses, the delivery system of employees coming in simply to stay extra hours to deliver the technology devices, Then there are the related wages for paying individuals overtime. That's just the top of the iceberg, if you will. So how are we going to manage that? Right now, fortunately, because of the Austin community being such a public school focused community, there is enough money in the fund balance. But utilizing this will leave us with not significant enough fund balance to meet the needs of what you're required to have, and it cannot be perpetual. So as a one-time expense, what it will do is it will cause us not to be able to do the things Austin ISD is known for being able to do, such as increase benefits or salaries. We have no idea what the legislature is going to do this biennium, but I assure you, none of us are thinking that they're going to give us any more money. In fact, our biggest concern is that they will be cutting those funds. Then at that point, I will be forced again to be making some of the most difficult decisions about which employees are able to stay employed and which ones would have to not. We don't want to get to that position. And so we're going to continue to be as fiscally conservative as we can, while still ensuring that we are providing all of the equipment necessary to ensure that there's health and safety on each of our campuses.
Would anyone like to add to that before we go to the next question?
I would say that we're all similarly making some tough decisions around having to pull our budgets in a lot tighter to ensure we can invest in things that are most important or most pressing, whether it relates to technology, whether it relates to software, whether it relates to PPE and sanitizing our spaces to ensure that our staff members who are on campus are safe. It's a very tough decision. We're doing things to prop ourselves up for this year. But when you look forward to years, 2, 3, and 4 down the line, you're concerned about that because you're having to make some tough calls right now to make things work. That you want to ensure that we continue to ensure that we are fiscally conservative to make it into our next fiscal year and the following fiscal year, and to ensure that our students have a high quality experience. So it's a very tough time. It's austere times, but we're doing our best to manage things in a way that sets us up for the future and not just for this period of time. So we're hopeful, we're optimistic, and we're also very cautious about how we approach all of our expenses going into the upcoming years.
Thank you, Wayne. So I want to switch gears for a moment and talk about racial equity. And so I'm curious to know what your school districts and institutions are doing to make better use of a racial equity lens as you continue to respond and adjust to issues that are arising from the pandemic. And we can go with Riza on this one.
So even before this pandemic, our Elgin ISD school board had made one of our goals to be on cultural proficiency. So we've already kind of been doing some work in that direction. And so we continue to do that work. And again, like I said, we do our home visits. We have partnership with Boys and Girls Club and also CIS to support some of our racial equity as well. And so that's been a huge work for us even prior to the pandemic for Elgin ISD.
Riza, what's CIS?
Communities in school.
Oh, okay.
Yes, communities in school. Sorry about that. Also, I do want to state too that, I know due to this pandemic, like we had to transition into this remote learning, but I also feel like there have been some positives. I feel like we need to address the needs of different learning environments for our students. And some of our students have really progressed in remote learning, and that's actually a better learning environment for them. And so this is something that I know Elgin ISD will continue to offer to our students. So usually in the past, our students would have to do another school district or a virtual online program, but I do feel like we have found out like this is a better learning format for some of our students. And then also, even I feel like we preparing them for college and career readiness, because there are also several companies and jobs that due to this have decided that people can work remote. So I do feel like there are some gains and positives out of this platform as well.
Vanessa, Wayne, or Dr. Elizalde, would y'all like to add anything?
Sure, I'd like to add more from a high level approach from my perspective and just from my experience. I think I'm at a place right now where we just need to call what it is. Our educational system was created upon white supremacy, and we need to have open opportunities for discussions around our historical past and where we are presently in dealing and healing from white supremacy. So then that way we can make better decisions on how to move forward. You know, Dr. Elizalde said, how are the children? How are our children? So I feel like we need to really kind of step back and reflect and revisit and ask ourselves, you know, what is the life trajectory of our children in our society? How do we define success? You know, when we say kids are successful and yet we look at standardized tests that are culturally biased, how does that align? And how can school be somewhat of a leveling field for children? And how can education make a better connection between what's happening during school hours and also what happens at home? So I'm still, you know, struggling and trying to understand myself, you know, working on my personal journey of racial equity and racial consciousness. And then also kind of moving forward and how do we really apply some of this learning to what's happening in our school system and our educational system and looking at the system itself to make better change. And so I'm not providing very specific solutions, but I'm putting out questions that we need to have these conversations more openly with our families, with our teachers, through some of this cultural proficiency work that Riza was talking about as well.
If I can add, do we still have time maybe for me to? Okay, all right, great.
Absolutely.
I'm so very fortunate to have experts in our district, one of the many experts in different areas in Austin ISD, but I'm fortunate to have Dr. Stephanie Hawley and Dr. Angela Ward are a part of our team. And so the cultural relevancy, the cultural proficiency, the anti-racist type trainings, those have been underway prior to the pandemic. And if anything, what we have, if there is some silver lining here, is the fact that we need to utilize what this pandemic has uncovered. And it's uncovered for those who haven't been affected. It isn't new for those individuals who have been disenfranchised from our system. But through this, it is a time for us to actually dig in more, because sometimes I get cautious. I get concerned rather that I hear some people, well, we need to deal with equity, but right now we're dealing with a pandemic. Well, actually, there's no better time than the current for us to ensure, because this is the enlightenment of what has been occurring to so many of our families and our children. And how are the children has actually come from a training that Dr. Hawley has done with us, because when we start talking about adults in our system, she always helps us get recentered. And how are the children? And those are very difficult conversations. And so I also think we can use our racial equity offices to help us recognize it doesn't have to be an either or. It actually needs to be a both and. And we are so accustomed in our society to be polarized. And we need to utilize our equity office's expertises. I challenge all of us, myself at the front of the line, to utilize our equity experts and their lens to bring us together so that we can rise through this pandemic a far better system of educating every student, regardless of their zip code. And in fact, the way we can utilize this is Dr. Hawley just this week volunteered to put together some communications that we are going to put both in print and email and a social media campaign. The students that are of color in our school organization are suffering the most. Now, when I say that, I know I'm going to hear, are you saying all students? Every student is suffering, but we cannot excuse the fact that our children of color are suffering more. And therefore, we do need to extend a campaign so that those parents are completely informed. It's still their choice. Austin ISD will offer remote instruction for the remainder of the school year, but we also want them to have the scientific data. We have seen no internal transmission of the virus in our schools. And so if students need that one-on-one kind of attention, now is a time for us to be able to have a system where our students can come to a healthy and safe school environment and receive that type of in-person on-campus instruction. But if they don't have all of the information, they may be hesitant to do that. Now, if that's still not available, our Racial Equity Office is also continuing to work with us on, well, is there a way for us to bring students together in learning pods, which was something that was discussed early on. Well, maybe the school needs to partner in a more active way if parents feel comfortable bringing students together in some smaller environments. So I actually feel very hopeful that our equity offices are a time for us to just really utilize them to expand the opportunities so that we can begin to change the very system that I heard Vanessa say over and over again, that people like me, people like Wayne and Riza and Vanessa and Courtney, we just got lucky. I got through a system because of just. There were so many other individuals around me who were far brighter, who were far more dedicated, and who didn't whatever we call success. I love that question. That system has to be where every single one of our students could replace all of us in this gallery view. When every single one of those students can replace all of us, then I might be able to excel.
And I'd just like to add, can I add, like I'm real passionate about the equity, and really that's why I came into education, because just some of my experiences that I had, but also as the principal at Elgin Middle School, when I first came here, like our Algebra 1, our advanced schools, which we already know that, you know, that's already a step for our students to get into college. And so when I got here, there was like 30 students that were taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And of that 30, there was maybe one African-American student. So in my time here at Elgin Middle School, now every single 8th grader takes Algebra 1. And so they were like, well, what if the students aren't ready? You know, the students aren't advanced, but you know, students fail 8th grade STAR and we give them tutorials. So we're gonna give them tutorials, but I'm real passionate about equity because I feel like it's not an achievement gap with our students, it's an opportunity gap. And so I'm just real passionate about the work that we do for equity. Like that's my motivation in education.
Thank you. Before we go to the next question, before Judy goes to her question, I want to add something about the equity. So before you all who are watching go out and try to find you a Stephanie Hawley or Angela Ward, I want to just say that when we create those positions, we have to do the work to lift those people because they will be burnt out if we expect them to do all the work because they're like individuals. And so we as institutions and communities have to do the work to lift them. Okay, and we can't rely on those one people.
Dr. Hawley and Dr. Ward are not available. I'm just saying right now, hands off, they are not available. I'm required to say that, okay?
You have a non-compete clause for them, right? They are rock stars. I've had a lot of conversation with Dr. Hawley and gosh, that they've done such amazing, important work. Let's shift this discussion about equity into the workforce. And I know at Houston-Tillotson, there's so much great work being done to match students with the workforce that is increasingly becoming technology-based. So how are we making sure the students of color especially are getting that training that Riza's talking about and getting matched with all these high-tech companies and new companies moving into Austin like Tesla, because that's where the rubber meets the road, is to make sure our workforce is diverse. Talk a little bit about that, Wayne.
Thanks, Judy. The key thing for us is that we've been on a 4-year, part of a 5-year study to ensure that we ensure that all of our curriculum is matched to 21st century job needs here in Austin, Texas. So we were an awardee of a Career Pathways grant that was funded by the Lilly Foundation and UNCF. And so we're in year 4 of that 5-year work, and we've been really working hard to ensure that our curriculum aligns, one. And then a part of that work is to ensure that we're able to articulate how a liberal arts degree translates directly into the tech environment. And so in doing that, we expose our liberal arts students, no matter what their major is, English, music, not computer science, that's one of the major ones, but English, music, communications, et cetera, education, and with a tech underpinning, so they understand how their work and their training can navigate directly into any space. And then as a part of that, we bring on a number of tech companies throughout their matriculation from freshman year through senior year and begin to socialize them in terms of how that company will want to hire a student like you because you have this liberal arts foundation around thinking, around teamwork, around creativity. And so that translates naturally into that work. And so you may be an English major and go on to do some coding work for an organization, or you may be a computer science major and go on to do some human resources work because you have that liberal arts underpinning that really teaches you to think, to be creative, to have a strong sense of self, to have leadership skills. So that's been our work thus far, and we continue to advance that work with expanding our curriculum development to ensure that all of our majors have that tech underpinning, that they're exposed to it at the onset of their matriculation, and then they have mentors along the way as well. So when a person is a freshman come into the institution, they are paired with a mentor who works in the tech space and/or space that they feel comfortable in. So they now have that network built into it as well. So we do all the front end work at the freshman level through the senior year to ensure that the connection points are built. And then I should also mention that as a part of that CPI work, for a group of students who come in the summer, they also work on developing an app for a company based on their major. So I could be an education major and I develop an ed app that helps me to address a social issue. So I'm building that skill and those toolkits along the way to ensure that I understand how my education training or my degree in education translates directly into technology, whether it be to work for a tech company or to be a better educator as relates to utilizing technology in the classroom. So that underpinning is pervasive throughout all of our curriculum to ensure that there's a natural match between what we're training you on from a degree perspective to the overarching workforce. Because we all know that technology is a part of our everyday lives. There's no longer is there a separation between any discipline in education. There's an underpinning, and no matter where you go to work, you're going to use technology. So we build that into the overall space from pre-freshman year through your senior year, and you know how to navigate it well. And you feel very comfortable with that technology.
Before we get to our call to action, Superintendent Alzalde, would you like to talk about that secondary school level in AISD and workforce preparedness and how we're making sure that students of color have the very same opportunities that the white students have?
That's going to definitely continue to be a focus for us here in Austin ISD. We see tremendous opportunities that we have begun, but we have not yet really, we haven't completely tied the transitions. What we notice is handoffs are the most challenging. When students move from elementary to middle school, it's that transition. When they move from middle to high school, it's that transition. And in the same vein, when they move from high school into post-secondary work, whether they're doing that in a career area or they're going straight to college, we have such just a plethora of universities and institutions and companies that want to partner with Austin ISD in creating internships and pathways that are connected to the very jobs that these companies in our area cannot fill. So what we're going to be working on, it's very similar to what I heard Wayne talk about, which is creating these curriculum compressions with organizations that come in and tell us your curriculum needs to have these things so that our students are prepared for that workforce. And no place other than, I think Austin ISD has the number of companies that have the type of wage jobs that, whether they are college or just licensure or certification, give our students living wage, places where they can earn a living, where they can have a good quality of life that they all deserve. We need to make sure that we maximize that. Companies and organizations are reaching out to us in many different ways. So through our early college, high school programs, we want to expand our P-Tech programs, which will specifically include exactly what Wayne is talking about. And we need institutions of higher ed to partner with. So we'll be continuing to reach out to places like Houston-Tillotson so that our children of color also have environments in which they feel comfortable. There's so many places that it's not just the academic work, which our students are quite capable of doing, but it is in fact the social environment that they're in that they have to navigate, that if you don't know how to do that, goes back to what Vanessa said, because our systems have been created for kids who do not generally look like us. They were created for something different, and we need to continue to work on that. So Austin is going to continue to commit themselves and really utilize this as a springboard to increase rapidly our connectivity into the workforce.
Thank you, Dr. Elizalde. So we're going to go into our call to action. And so this call to action is really for those who are watching. So regardless if they're parents or guardians, what can those people who are watching you right now do to lift and support our students and our educators real time? And I'll start with Vanessa.
Sure. I just want to say humanity first, right? How we need to always ask ourselves and take time to reflect on how are our children doing in our lives? How are our teachers doing? How are the humans around us doing? We need to support them. We need to communicate, right? I said that earlier. Communicate regularly and in different ways. Be active listeners. Stay connected, one-on-one and in community with the people in our lives. And disconnect together from screens whenever possible and try to connect as humans. And really let's make space to reflect and truly look at how we can ensure that in the post-pandemic, education doesn't really return to business as usual, but instead really focuses on ways to continue to reduce inequities and create more community cohesion.
Thank you, Vanessa. Riza.
Again, I think we got to continue to speak life, speak hope in all of our students. And like our students, especially at the middle school level, like they know when you're genuine. So I think you have to be genuine and they have to know deep down that you care about them. So again, I'm gonna go back to relationships. Like you got to build that relationship and let them know that they care, that you care about them, and they'll do any work and meet any expectation that you set in front of them. So after you build up that relationship and touch their hearts, then you put the bar up high for the expectation so they are successful in life.
Thank you. I'll go to Wayne and then we'll close out with Dr. Elizalde.
Thank you, ma'am. I would say again, grace and innovation. Continue to be graceful in how you approach different things and give yourself space to make mistakes and to bump your head left and right from a student perspective and from a parent perspective. I think lastly, innovation. Focus on what can be versus what's not. I think that's the best advice I picked up along this way, is to really be innovative in my approach. And in that, I'm focusing on what can be versus what it's not. So those are the two things I would offer, are grace and innovation.
I think everyone said it so eloquently. It's difficult. I'm like, please never follow the three people that are on this panel. You know, I think encouraging them to speak their experiences, no matter how difficult they are, the more they communicate to us, and no matter how hard it may be for us to hear, we need to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly in order for us to truly be able to respond to those needs. I'm gonna continue to ask all of us in Austin ISD to put ourselves in everyone else's shoes. And I think I'll steal, I know Stephen Covey took credit for this, but I'll close. I give St. Francis of Assisi because of my Catholic background. Not that I was a good Catholic, but nonetheless Catholic. St. Francis of Assisi said, seek first to understand, then to be understood. I think we all maybe can use a little help in that area, because it is very easy to admire the problem from afar, as opposed to really rolling up our sleeves and being a part of the solution. And so I ask us all to help each other during this time. And I would be remiss if I didn't even throw out that, you know, Austin even had an opportunity because of the partnerships that we have in Austin ISD and the crisis fund, millions of dollars that were raised to ensure that we were able to feed our families, that we were able to provide services. And that happened through partnerships like the Austin Council of PTA, like so many of the partnerships, the Austin Partners in Education. There's so many organizations that help Austin ISD and the Chambers of Commerce. I know I've left someone out and I apologize up front, but I want all of those partners to know to please continue to support our families, because we know it's not supporting any individual within our district. It's about the support for our families, and I'm eternally grateful for all of that.
So thank you to each of you for taking the time to be a part of this conversation and for all the work that you do in our community. And for those of you who are watching, if you would like to continue this conversation, we will have part 2 tomorrow. Part 2 will be hosted by the LBJ Future Forum, and we'll be focusing specifically on higher education. And in that conversation, we'll have President Pierce Burnett of Houston-Tillotson University and former Senator Kirk Watson to lead that discussion. My colleague will drop the link in the comment section of this video, so please RSVP, and we hope to see you at that conversation. Judy, is there anything you'd like to include before we go?
I'd just like to also echo what Courtney said. This has been a terrific panel, and I think that all of you have opened some hearts and minds today, and we appreciate you sharing what education is like in 2020, because there have been so many new challenges, and obviously all of you are doing such an important job in our community, and we thank you for sharing your perspective today. I also want to thank everyone for their patience in pivoting to this virtual Engage series. We had to do this in the spring when the pandemic hit, and I think we've actually been able to reach a wider, more diverse audience virtually, so I'm very grateful for that. And thanks to everybody who watched today, and I want to wish everyone a happy, healthy holiday season, and we look forward to bringing you more vital discussions in 2021. Make it a beautiful day. It's a sunny, lovely day out there. Thank you all.